they have prepared coffins for themselves.
喺過去1年嚟咧，相信我係被社會部分人士認定係政府嘅叫票對象，亦都係有機會轉態嘅其中一名泛民成員。雖然如此咧，我始終認為人在做天在看，到咗投票嘅。
What we see is playing for everybody to see. I don't think Mr. Chen Kam-lam should be worried about us being tied together. We are guided by our conscience. Maybe some people don't really have any conscience. Never have they had any conscience. I can explain to people without conscience what conscience is all about. Before I talk about the way I vote, let me say something about the proposal. I've said it many times, though. Under the A31 NPCSC decision, any proposal would be a deviation of true and universal and equal suffrage. Universal suffrage, Mr. President, is not something from Chinese. It is a foreign concept. In Annex 1 of the Basic Law and NPCSC's interpretation, Article 7 there says that after 2007, if we want to change the electoral method for the election of the chief executive, we need to have 2/3 majority support of the council, the consent of the chief executive, and it has to be reported to the NPCSC for approval. From this, we can see that in terms of the 5-step process, the NPCSC has the power in step 2. It doesn't have the power to dictate the model for Hong Kong. Now, it is a political decision. The NPCSC can't do anything they like, but under the Basic Law, it is stipulated very clearly. The A31 decision, the NPCSC has imposed 3 hurdles on the model, like the threshold for nomination. We need to have 50% or more support. There will be 2 or 3 candidates for CE election. And there is also the recommendation and nomination restrictions. The Secretary gave different explanation, but I don't think I can subscribe to the Secretary or Mr. Li Fei's interpretation. I talked about universal suffrage. If we do not use universal suffrage, if you use the word election, why is it that the word election is written into the Basic Law and we have been fooled for 20-odd years? When you drafted Article 43, why didn't you just stick with the word election? Mr. C.Y. Leung said in this chamber that any election that is in line with the local law would be regarded as universal suffrage. In North Korea, DPRK, they're going to have universal suffrage this year. In each district, the councillors will be nominated by the People's Labour Party, and there is only one nominee only, and the electorate will have to cast a vote on this nominee, and this is the DPRK's style of election. Now, we have been through so much fanfare, and you can say that with only one candidate, it can also be called universal suffrage. Why do you bother engaging in so much fanfare? I cited the North Korea example to show that there must be a minimum international standard with regard to universal suffrage, and that is equal and universal suffrage. That's the basic minimum. You talked about the universal suffrage means universal suffrage in keeping with the local situation. Why doesn't the government say that all we need is to have one single candidate, and we can test his popularity by going to the poll. I think if they do so, they would cause even more backlash. They have staged this massive show. What is the point of it? Some said that many PANDAM members are asking for too much. We've never been asking for anything. This is some solemn promise given to us, and the people of Hong Kong regarded it as one of the conditions for the reunification. We have the protection of the Basic Law, and we have the universal suffrage enshrined in the Basic Law. We have been waiting from 2007, and we hoped that in 2017 there would be universal suffrage. Universal suffrage is all about genuine choice. The mainland, of course, mentions the national security consideration. I think we ought to deal with universal national security through the law instead of the implementation of universal suffrage. If you have the national security concerns, why don't you impose or draft legislation to govern the act of the chief executive? Now, why don't you have the legislation to govern everything? Instead, you're tailor-making this electoral system to pick and choose someone who is obedient. Some said that the PANDAMs are too recalcitrant and we're not making any concessions. Mr. President, in politics, we're trying to, it's about the art of getting the impossible things in politics. Politics is also the art of compromise. We cannot compromise because there is this cage imposed upon us in the form of the A31 decision. The cage has been locked very tightly. It's only when we break through this cage that we will be able to achieve universal suffrage. If you talked about politics being the art of compromise, shouldn't we be proceeding together? With 830 decision, we cannot really proceed any forward. We are only able to walk into the cage. Mr. Chen Kam-lam said that other than the civic nomination, we didn't suggest anything at all, and this is wrong. During the first round of consultation, different scholars and academics made many different proposals. According to the Hong Kong U's proposal, at least there are 15 different proposals that are being floated that are in keeping with the international standard of universal and equal suffrage. I'm not sure how the mainland screened the proposals. All of them were rejected across the board without any consultation, and we ended up with this 831 framework. Let me put this to the officials of the Hong Kong SAR. In the whole process of deliberation, how was the decision taken? You've got so much public opinions. Did you reflect the public views as they are, or did you impose any weighting, or did you withhold any public views from the site of Beijing? President, as a functional constituency member for the first time, I am concerned about how the trade views the whole thing. I have 30,000 odd in the electorate. I've held 20, 30 talks and seminars, and I've invited a lot of scholars and practitioners and politicians along to explain what was electoral system an election. I've done 3 opinion polls, March 2014, September 2014 was the second one. The March one, that was before the framework was imposed. I consulted my electorate about their expectations of the CE election. In the September election last year, consultation last year, I consulted them on the A31 framework. The latest one was conducted just last week, and I've announced the findings. 3,961 responded, and there was only one question in the poll. We asked them whether they support or they oppose this government proposal. 52% of the people were in opposition to this 2017 proposal. 45.6% were in support. 2.2 expressed no opinion. I fully appreciate that for the professionals, like many people of Hong Kong, hold different views regarding these electoral proposals. Why is it that the government's proposal is dividing the society so much? I think the government has a lot to answer for it. Why is it that the percentage in support is not 70 or 80%, but just 40-something percent? Is it really a flop? The accountants have to offer auditing advice, and the most important thing is they offer true and fair views. We have to offer true and fair views regarding the financial statement. We have to ascertain whether they are true and fair. A financial statement has to be consistent. It has to be in keeping with the proper procedures. It has to reflect the true situation. When I look at the words universal suffrage, I'm asking myself whether this government proposal is a true and fair proposal. This is one of the important principles when I decide the way to vote. I've pondered this for more than a year. I've read up on the criteria in many different places. I've read up on a lot of different laws in other places, and I find myself unable to support this proposal. And this is not an ill-considered decision, not at all. There were 12 professionals who set up a body to express the professionals' views regarding the electoral reform. I've known some accountants, they have set up a body to express concerns about the constitutional reform. Present, because of the work commitment, many of the accountants cannot come to the fore. It is kind of saddening because the professionals in sophisticated society like Hong Kong dare not express their views in a peaceful and rational manner because there may be consequences. In this electoral model, I have looked at Iran and North Korea, and I find it hard to subscribe to the view that this model is a universal suffrage. If it is an election model, then I can cast my vote in favor, but you're calling it universal suffrage, and this is misnomer. I don't think I can support it. In my manifesto, President, I said that I hope that in 2017 the election for the chief executive should be universal suffrage, and it should be universal and equal suffrage. Now, regarding this commitment, I've never forgotten about it altogether.